Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at something that is frankly a profound turning point in human evolution. We're talking about the neurodigital synthesis. We're going to explore how high-bandwidth brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, are literally bypassing our biological limits to merge mind and machine. And look, we're no longer just talking about basic neuroprosthetics to fix a single function. No, we're talking about a structural reconfiguration of how human intelligence actually interacts with digital environments. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll hit the biological bottleneck. Then, bridging mind and machine. After that, synchronizing spikes with silicon, generative AI mind reading, clinical benefits and limitations, and finally, we'll wrap up with the price of cognitive liberty. All right, Section 1, the biological bottleneck. To really grasp why this tech is moving so fast, we first need to ask ourselves a pretty fundamental question. What is the ultimate limitation of the human body? Well, it all comes down to this staggering mathematical paradox. Think about this. Our human sensory system is an absolute powerhouse. It absorbs information from the environment at roughly 1 billion bits per second. But our physical behavioral output, it's trapped at a mere 10 bits per second. Yeah, 10. Whether you're typing on a keyboard or speaking a sentence out loud, that is the absolute maximum rate at which you can consciously express information to the outside world. So this obviously creates a massive bottleneck. You've got this high-resolution inner brain, which is just brimming with rich, high-dimensional neural signals, complex thoughts, and latent intentions. But it's trapped. It's stuck behind the incredibly low-resolution output channel of your outer body. Just to put that into perspective, basic joint coordination requires at least 465 bits per second. So trying to squeeze the entirety of the human experience through a 10-bit per second bottleneck, it means we're losing an immense amount of our own cognitive richness, simply because our biological hardware just can't transmit it fast enough. Moving on to Section 2, bridging mind and machine. To solve this problem and actually restore the true fidelity of human intent, we need a totally new output pathway, one that bypasses our peripheral nerves entirely. And that brings us to the foundation of this technological bridge, the closed-loop BCI system. It operates in 4 continuous steps. First up, signal acquisition, which records the raw brain activity. Second is feature extraction, pulling out the relevant neural patterns. Third, we have feature translation, where we decode those patterns into actionable commands. And finally, device output, which actually executes that command. Like moving a robotic arm or navigating a cursor on a screen. And because it's a closed loop, it feeds real-time feedback right back to the brain, letting the user intuitively adjust and learn on the fly. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how modern engineering is absolutely shattering previous data rate limits to make that first step, signal acquisition, vastly superior. Just look at the BISC, the biological interface system to cortex. This intracortical implant uses 50 micrometer ultra-thin silicon packed with tens of thousands of electrodes, and it's capable of transferring 100 megabits per second wirelessly. We're talking about capturing raw, single neuron action potentials at unprecedented speeds. It's effectively turning the human cortex into a high-speed digital data portal. Which naturally brings us to Section 3, synchronizing spikes with silicon. Because, as you can probably guess, having 100 megabits per second of raw neural data creates a brand new problem. Traditional computers just aren't built to process it efficiently. Standard von Neumann computer architectures, which separate memory and processing, basically choke on this kind of massive parallel biological data. So the solution here is neuromorphic computing. This is brain-inspired hardware where memory and processing are actually co-located within artificial neurons and synapses right on the chip itself. Chips like Intel's Loihi 2 or the Spinnaker system are what we call event-driven. They don't have this constant, power-hungry background clock ticking away. Instead, they only fire asynchronously when a discrete spike of information occurs, which is exactly how the biological brain works. This makes them incredibly fast and phenomenally energy efficient, which is obviously an absolute necessity if you're embedding a computer chip inside a human skull. But the biological brain has to meet this hardware halfway, and it does that through neuroplasticity. Specifically, something called spike timing dependent plasticity, or STDP. Think of it like a biological learning rule. When a user thinks about moving a digital cursor and then physically sees it happen on a screen, that precise timing triggers STDP. The brain actually physically rewires itself, strengthening those specific synapses to operate the BCI more fluidly over time. Now, take a look at this. This brilliantly illustrates how we keep this rapid learning from spiraling completely out of control. We use BCM theory and its synthetic counterpart, the dynamic weight adaptation mechanism, or WAM. Because if neurons just constantly strengthen without any limits, you'd get network collapse or even seizures. WAM applies a sliding biological threshold to the artificial neuromorphic chips. Basically, it ensures the silicon decoder doesn't get overexcited or unresponsive, meaning the implant can run stably long-term without needing constant manual recalibration. It's like finding perfect biological homeostasis in silicon. Moving to Section 4, Generative AI Mind Reading. So, with stable, high-bandwidth hardware in place, let's look at the software side to see how artificial intelligence actually interprets these complex signals. We have made a massive leap here. In the past, BCIs relied on discriminative decoding. That basically meant looking at brainwaves and mapping them to a rigid, predefined menu. Sort of like asking the brain, hey, are you looking at the letter A, B, or C? It worked, but it was incredibly slow. Today, we're using generative decoding, powered by large language models and diffusion networks. Instead of picking from a rigid menu, these AI models interpret the open-ended, latent space of your neural activity. They dynamically reconstruct your fluid, natural thoughts. So the crucial point is that generative AI isn't just painfully spelling out words letter by letter anymore. It's pulling full, continuous sentences and even complex visual images directly from the mind. That is a massive breakthrough for restoring fluid speech to people who've lost it. Current studies even show diffusion models reconstructing visual stimuli from brainwaves with structural similarity index scores between 0.26 and 0.43. We are literally decoding the imagery someone is perceiving or imagining. And because these systems are bidirectional, they feature write-back mechanisms, actually allowing us to send sensory feedback right back into the brain. Section 5, Clinical Benefits and Limitations. Now, let's ground all this theory by looking at the practical applications today. What are the actual clinical benefits of the synthesis, and what physical hurdles are still standing in our way? The clinical promise is frankly immense. Precise STDP pairing can restore motor control for stroke patients way faster than traditional physical therapy. And for Alzheimer's patients who can't actively communicate, passive BCIs could continually monitor their cognitive states for timely interventions. However, the hardware reality still presents some serious roadblocks. To process this massive data wirelessly, systems often have to compress or downsample the signals, which leads to critical information loss. Furthermore, there are physical issues like electrode drift, where sensors shift slightly in the brain over time, and that heavily degrades the signal quality. Fixing these data integrity and hardware issues comes with incredibly high computational and financial costs that researchers are still struggling to mitigate in real-world settings. All right, Section 6, the price of cognitive liberty. This brings us to the really sobering part of this whole explainer. Plugging the human mind directly into a digital, AI-driven network carries unprecedented societal, ethical, and financial implications. We have to objectively confront the emerging risks here. We are looking at the possibility of literal brain hacking, unauthorized access to your neural intent, which could fundamentally alter a person's sense of identity and agency. The literature highlights severe vulnerabilities to sniffing attacks, where raw neural data is intercepted, and denial of service attacks, which could effectively paralyze a user relying on a neuroprosthetic. Plus, there is the terrifying, very practical financial risk of manufacturer bankruptcy. Think about it. If the company that built your implant goes out of business, you lose access to software updates, maintenance, and spare parts for a device that is physically wired into your brain. All of this converges on a completely new frontier of human rights, summarized perfectly by this quote right here: the right to control access to one's thoughts. Neural data is the single most personal, intimate health information in existence. It literally precedes our conscious filters. Without robust cryptographic safeguards and totally new ethical frameworks from policymakers, the very technology that liberates the mind from its biological bottleneck could entirely compromise our cognitive liberty. And as we look to the horizon, to a future where bidirectional BCIs could one day generate fully immersive dreamscapes or allow for direct brain-to-brain communication, we're left to ponder the ultimate philosophical boundary. If our internal reality can be perfectly simulated, uploaded, or manipulated at will by digital systems, how do we define what's real? It's a huge question, and it's one we are absolutely going to have to answer as we merge the biological mind with the digital world. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time. Hey,